Easy guys, today I take 5 survivors desperate to stay alive into a Lost Tribe scenario and test their mettle in a game of Rimworld. As Rimworld told me, this was a difficult scenario, and because I hadn't played the game in about 5 years, I'll be playing vanilla with no mods and no expansions as I get familiar with things again, because, as I remember, the game was pretty good without mods too. To maximise my chance of success, I randomly generated 5 characters. I cared not for how many points they all had in each craft, only that my characters had a burning passion for each skill set featured in Rimworld. With burning passions across the board, I ended up with 5 women. But who were they? Google, most successful group of girls. The Spice Girls. That'll do. At first we had Posh Spice. She spent her early years pouting in the playground and bullying children. After finishing her reign of terror in high school, she was a superb marksman and handy in close quarters, although her insecurities about being the worst Spice Girl had made her extremely neurotic. Next up, Sporty Spice. After spending the following 10 years after her Spice Girl's career living in a remote cave, she became a jack of all trades, a doctor and a cook. Having survived her early life just 7 miles from Liverpool, she was excellent at close quarters combat. Scary Spice. Loud, bombastic and trigger happy. Scary Spice was also an adept craftsman with a green-fingered touch. Ginger Spice, the group leader. Built like a concrete wall, she had shaved her head and began a career in bricklaying after she departed from the Spice Girls. She was also an avid intellectual, an undergrounder, and a fast learner. Finally, Baby Spice. After years of strangling the teddy bears in her soft toy collection, she was adept at melee, but also had a knack for construction, crafting, and planting. But it was Ginger Spice that brought them together for one last rodeo. The Spice Girls were on a mission to test their mettle and show the world they weren't just yesterday's news. But what adversities would they face out here on the Rim, and would they have what it takes to survive this hostile environment? They had to start from scratch. We would need to analyse the surroundings. The colony would benefit from being placed close to fertile ground. This gave a bonus to growing crops. It would also benefit from being strategically located so it could be defended if needed. After much searching, they settled on a spot that they deemed perfect. They set up a stockpile zone. This would offer a place to store their resources for the time being, although ideally they would want to move their stockpile inside later on to prevent items from deteriorating in the elements. Next, schedules were set up, ensuring time for recreation and sleep. Everyone had different tasks to perform depending on their skill set. From firefighting to butchering, everyone had a role to play. Priorities were set so each girl would perform the task she was most passionate about. Not only was this efficient, but it would also be good for morale in the early days. Mood can make or break a colonist. With the help of Posh Spice, who had bought her faithful Yorkshire Terrier Naoki, the girls began clearing the area of trees and building a wooden complex. It would be function over form for the time being. Resources were tight. Ginger named it the Spice Shack. They built a small kitchen and a butchering area, kept separate to avoid disease and promote good hygiene. A dining room was also set up to improve morale and create a gathering place for socializing. There would be no beds for now, and the girls had little technology, so they slept on the floor in a communal barracks. Next, Scary Spice began planting crops. Rice was planted as it was faster growing, and hay grass was grown to ensure the girls' 2 donkeys had enough food for the winter months, along with a pen to enclose them. Scary thought it would be a great idea to grow smoke leaf, as one day it would be a potent trade commodity that could be used to buy the things they wanted most. Baby Spice did most of the building in the early days. She built the indoor storage area to prevent items from deteriorating, areas for entertainment were assigned, and defensive walls were erected to help end unwanted visitors. Posh Spice was sent to hunt the local wildlife so there would be enough food for the winter months. She was fast, and her sharpshooting skills were unmatched within the colony. She was keen to prove to the other girls that she was more than a middle-class snob. Jerry Halliwell's task for now was researching. She wanted the girls to have a bright future. In many ways, she felt like the mother hen to them all, and so she put her wit and intellect into researching clothing and smithing before turning her sights to electricity. Just like Ned Stark, she knew that winter would eventually come, and when it did, the girls had to be ready. For now, though, the girls worked hard for their little slice of paradise. They had a solid base, a stockpile of resources, and a plan for the future. Working hard to create something with their hands was a feeling of great satisfaction. Surely nothing could stop them now. As the leather from Posh's hunting ventures came in, pants, shirts, and dusters were made. Decent clothing for next winter would be high on the priority list. Unfortunately, Scary Spice fell ill due to food poisoning, probably Sporty's handiwork, who had been running the kitchens. Someone had ejected blood all over a stack of simple meals. Feeling guilty, Sporty tended to Scary while she cleaned vigorously to prevent any future illness. In other dire news, Baby had made many leather pants for the girls, but neglected to provide enough button shirts to complement them. The girls were eager to try out the pants. It was like a day out shopping at a Gucci store. Unfortunately, they had little else to cover themselves, leading to most of the Spice Girls going topless. This left many girls in a foul mood who resented being nude. Ginger had good news to lift spirits though. She had been researching ways to make their lives easier and had found a way to make proper beds for them all. The girls had a welcome increase in comfort. Little did they realize the tragedy that would follow in the coming days. Posh Spice, eager to prove herself, had been venturing farther and farther away from the Spice Shack in search of food, and she hadn't spotted a lynx prowling in the shadows. It sprung out to attack. She knew she wouldn't be able to outrun it at this distance. Instead, she gave her most menacing pout and fought it toe-to-toe. If she won this battle, perhaps the girls would see her as an equal, not some snobby shy girl. But it wasn't enough. She fell, and as the ravenous lynx struggling for food in the wilderness finished her, Ginger couldn't believe her eyes, and the girls descended on the lynx just seconds later. How could this have happened? Naoki, Posh's Yorkshire Terrier, sensed the disturbance from across the map and was left in a daze. It was as if millions of bad vocals suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. He knew something terrible had happened. Posh Spice was the best of the Spice Girls, in her own way. The irony was that some of the other girls were jealous of Posh and saw her as a rival they were glad to be rid of, increasing their mood. Sporty Spice, however, was devastated. She had lost her sister from another mister. Sporty feared showing weakness, feeling that the others might take advantage of her, but now she wished she hadn't been so defensive. Maybe if she'd told Posh how much she meant to the group, she wouldn't have thrown herself at that lynx to try and prove something. A dark feeling of guilt crept over her. A sarcophagus was set up in Posh's memory, and shortly afterwards, Baby Spice threw a party to celebrate, pay respects to Posh Spice's passing. The colony wouldn't be the same after this blow. The simple meals she had helped gather meat for rotted away in storage. They needed cooler conditions to preserve them, but the correct research would have to be done first to acquire the tools to do so. So this left them with little to eat once more. With the idea that technology, heating and cooling would help solve this issue, the girls were sent to mine some of the compacted components around the area, a key component of technology later on. If they prepared early, they could have a small stockpile to tuck into as soon as the prerequisite research was complete. Next, traders arrived, and while there were things that the girls needed, they had little to trade with. Although not all was lost, the traders functioned as impromptu bodyguards for the girls, killing a mad boom rat as it came in to attack them. It was risky, as any traders killed near Spice World might cause them to lose reputation with us, but in their current state, there was little the girls could do about it. Food production was slow without Posh Spice. Rice and hay grass were harvested, food for the girls and their animals over the winter, and cotton, which would help produce clothing and act as a trading commodity. However, during a sudden cold snap, the plants they were growing swiftly died outside. The girls had saved what they could, but the rest was lost. Luckily, they had chosen fast-growing crops, else all would have been lost. At this point, Flea arrived at camp. He was on the run and needed help. After losing Posh, taking in another colonist seemed like a good idea. He was good at shooting, crafting, and had some intellect about him. Not skills we were short of right now, but he could help alleviate some of the workload on the other girls at least, helping relieve Sporty of her hunting burdens and Ginger from research if she wanted to mine. As an added lucky bonus, some chunks of spacecraft had fallen from orbit nearby, offering the girls some extra components, if only they had the technology to exploit them. Ginger was hoping to turn that around though. For the most part, the Spice Girls and their new arrival were holding their own, and it wasn't long before they received a distress call from a woman known only as Z. She was being held hostage close by and promised to join any colony that helped to free her. With only one guard, the Spice Girls felt up to the task. On the world screen, a caravan was formed and the girls ventured forth. And it wasn't long before they arrived at the enemy camp. The intentions were to get the girls behind cover so they could cause maximum damage with the fewest casualties. Flea soon proved his worth to the Spice Girls, raining hell on the guard with his machine pistol, while Ginger and Sporty snuck into position to provide support with bow and arrow. The guard was soon down, and the Spice World has moved in to break Z out of her confines. This was a nice location, better developed than their own home. They could have stayed and developed this location, but they decided against it, which they might regret later. The girls disassembled valuable technology and reformed the caravan, taking Z and anything they could back to Spice World. But it wasn't long before they were stopped dead in their tracks by a pack of man-hunting rabbits. Luckily, not enough of them to cause too much injury, but a conflict they would have rather avoided. Back at base, Z started to settle in. She was a great cook and performed food preparation duties in the Spice Shack. She was a fan of the Spice Girls. She thought their first album was bomb, and was saddened to hear that Posh had succumbed to the wild planet. She paid her respects at the sarcophagus, wishing she had the chance to meet her. Posh sounded like a hero. Orders were given next to begin construction of the Spice Hole. Ginger wanted to move the colony up a notch, and as a few girls, such as Sporty and herself, were undergrounders, it seemed a logical step towards a little more comfort that they were so sorely missing, as Sporty wasn't doing so well since Posh passed. But the girls' passion for their duties kept morale high, until a psychic drone kicked in shortly after, pushing the girls to the ragged edge once again. Sporty was a Swiss Army knife colonist, and she was handling many of the food duties, which were getting intense as winter approached. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and Sporty broke. Luckily, just a minor break, shaking the delicately balanced house of cards, a tantrum that left Sporty kicking the place about a bit. And as fall ended, the temperatures plummeted outside. Some military traders strolled in, but the girls had little to sell. The Spice Hole looked nowhere near finished, and to put icing on the cake, a raid arrived, outlanders from Almanus. It looked like a one-man army. Blackjack. Would he attack now or wait for the military caravan hitched up outside Spice World to leave? The girls didn't want to take any chances and were drafted up behind the fortifications. As they did, a manhunting group of Arctic foxes entered the fray. Double trouble. But the foxes went straight for Blackjack, turning a double disaster into a potential win for the Spice Girls. Blackjack had seen better days, and as the end of life on the rim came to greet him, the final foxes went straight for the military trade convoy. It wasn't the last of the raid either. 2 more of Blackjack's friends arrived, but they were soon outnumbered and killed by the trade convoy. Over the coming days, the mood got worse in Spice World. Flea began making rivals with the Spice Girls, going on an insulting spree, particularly towards Ginger Spice, after making fun of her accent and calling her a short ass. Morning broke, and still, Flea was giving everyone an earful. He had been at it all night, and Z had become confused and delirious after being insulted 10 times. To make matters worse, another raid arrived. This time it was the Pact of Brio that wanted to shut the Spice Girls down. With 2 colonists out of action or mentally unstable, it was up to the rest of the girls to hold the line. Thankfully, Flea soon came to his senses and joined the defensive line. But the girls had gotten into position too early, and in the long pensive wait for the raiders to attack, Scary Spice started mouthing off and had a tantrum. All the girls could do was watch as Scary marched off, giving the Pact of Brio an opportunity they couldn't refuse. Scared and confused, Scary was knocked unconscious and taken away while the other attacker went for the rest of the girls. Desperate to save Scary, the girls made light work of the second attacker and plotted an intercept course for the first. Catching up, Scary's would-be kidnapper was spilt onto the dirt. Scary was okay, but in the commotion, Naoki, Posh's pet Yorkshire Terrier, was killed. Who would kill a Yorkshire Terrier, the sick reprobate? Raiders had slipped into the base undetected and began a reign of terror. Luckily, Z, taking bed rest, was safe inside for now. Desperate, the girls took on the intruders, missing potential cover. Nevertheless, victory was won and the attackers were captured, but they needed facilities to put them, and the Spice Girls had nothing. So the prisoners were sent to the Spice Hole that Ginger Spice had been creating. Conditions were filthy down Ginger's hole. It was dingy, dark and cold. There were no beds or items of comfort for our prisoners here. Some say it's what they deserved, but of course, it wasn't long before the first of our prisoners, Crane, went berserk and attempted to break out of his cell, giving Sporty Spice a black eye on the way out. Next, Crane desperately tried to free his accomplice. A prison break was afoot, and who could blame them? Spice World was drafted and sent to meet them. Crane was subdued and thrown back into the confines of his cell. Thinking of what her mum would say, Baby Spice took pity on the prisoners and tried everything she could with her limited resources to improve their lives, with torches providing light and warmth. Not all our girls were so sympathetic. Back at the Spice Shack, the walls and the floor were an artwork of blood and vomit. The girls desperately needed to stop being scrubs and pull the colony together to survive the winter. But before any semblance of normality could return to the shack, Sporty Spice broke into a murderous rage. The loss of Posh Spice still weighing heavy on her mind, and the audacious attack from the Pact of Brio had pushed her towards vengeance. She beat one of the prisoners to a bloody pulp with her bare hands, and then complained about seeing a dead body. As the girls reeled in shock over losing a prisoner, Flea had been assigned to cleaning duty for the time being to bring some comfort back to the shack. For a short while, things started to get back on track. Research for electricity had been finished, and a turbine was constructed to generate power for the colony. The girls had plenty of components from previous ventures. There were undoubtedly flaws with the colony design. Defenses were weak. A kill box of sorts would have been advantageous, yet the girls pushed on with the spice hole, being so close to completion. Food was constantly an issue, and a hungry warg, starving in the winter cold, pursued Sporty as she hunted food for herself. A memory of Posh slipped over her mind. She sprung into action and overcame the warg, who was repurposed to feed our colony. However, there was a need for even more food, with little to nothing in storage. Orders were handed over to hunt muffalo. These creatures provided a lot of meat, yet some wildlife was more risky to hunt than others. Muffalo had a small chance they would defend themselves and hurt our hunter. Risk versus reward. Sure enough, it wasn't long until the muffalo retaliated. Flea was knocked unconscious, but the other girls were drafted up and suppressed the other muffalo. The corpses kept fresh in the bitter cold. A rudimentary freezer for now. It was a long and cold winter, and Sporty Spice, still torn over Posh's loss, continued to struggle more than the other girls. She couldn't accept that Posh was gone and had become fixated that she was still alive. And so, Sporty did the unspeakable. She dug up Posh's corpse and presented it to the other girls on the dining room table. Posh became the topic of conversation over breakfast for the coming days. The girls had forgotten what she looked like since her passing. Some of the girls were even slightly jealous at how much weight she had lost. Obviously, a new diet regime they had been kept in the dark about. Despite the girls' jealousy, Posh's rotting remains stunk like a bathroom accident, driving the other girls mad. The smell woke Scary Spice in the middle of the night, and she immediately went on a tantrum spree, destroying a stack of the most valuable thing that the Spice Girls had, their components. Next to break was Z. Disgusted to find the Spice Shack stank like an afternoon farting contest, she began taking her rage out on Flea and Baby Spice. She had to be stopped before someone was hurt. Luckily, the girls managed to incapacitate her without dealing too much harm. As all the commotion over Posh's corpse went on in the Spice Shack, everyone had forgotten about Crane abandoned in the spice hole, and he was now attempting another prison break. Ginger, who had just about had it up to her ears at this point, was not going to let that fly. She took Crane on in melee combat, incapacitating him and throwing him back into his prison of vomit. Poor Crane. But on the bright side, at least someone decided to bury Posh again, ending her wrath of terror. Meanwhile, a survivor from elsewhere crash-landed in a pod outside the Spice Shack. Injured and left out in the freezing conditions, he would soon die. Some might consider this a blessing compared to a life in Spice World. Still, Flea tried to rescue him, although sadly, the stricken colonist didn't survive the journey back. At least the girls had food again due to the stack of muffalo outside. The same couldn't be said for the girls' pet donkeys, who were now starving as all their grazing pastures had dried up in the winter. Luckily, the hay the Spice Girls grew last spring had survived despite all the chaos, and a small barn was planned to allow the horses to eat for the winter. A flash storm roared overhead that night, a premonition perhaps of things to come. It wasn't long before poor Crane attempted another prison break. Once more, he was captured and thrown back into his prison of vomit, and the door sealed behind him. On a positive note, progress was being made on the Spice Hole, making it a more pleasant place to live. It was finally nearing completion after all this hardship. How long before the girls could move in and enjoy a more comfortable life? Research for batteries had also been completed. The spice hole could have heating and cooling system to keep the girls comfortable through the seasons. With all these upgrades, Crane, our prisoner, was starting to feel comfortable. Some say he was now the most comfortable colonist in Spice World. Despite being on the cusp of something great, more chaos was afoot in the Spice Shack. Sporty and Flea had gotten into a fight over who had been sick in the kitchen, which triggered Scary to have another tantrum. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, there was a raid from Ominous again. The girls drafted up and took a stand. The terrain defended the attack as well. Should the girls fall back or hunker down? In a moment of indecision, Flea was incapacitated, followed by Scary. Sadly, despite the group's best efforts, Ginger wasn't so lucky. With the wrath of 100 teddy bears, Baby leapt over the line. Sporty and Z rushed to defend her, and the girls charged the opposition. Baby was the first to fall. Tonight was the night when two became one, as Sporty fell as well, leaving Z to defend them all. Ultimately, Z and Sporty were taken into slavery. Baby Spice and Flea never survived their injuries. On the other hand, Crane had done quite well for himself, sleeping soundly in his comfortable abode, plotting his next prison break. Perhaps he could stick around and do this place up. Maybe he would find his old comrades. Who knows what the future held for him.